Whenever we think about amps, we usually tend to go first to like, what's a good gigging amp, a good live amp, something that's going to be loud enough to be able to play on stage and all that good stuff. But today, we're actually going to be going on the opposite end of the spectrum. We're going to be looking at good practice amps, specifically the Fender Rumble 40 and the Ampeg RB108. Two of the most popular practice amps on the market today. We're going to be talking about how they differ and which one might be best for you. Stick around. Hey everybody, this is Carlos with Alamo Music Center here in beautiful downtown San Antonio, Texas. You can find us online at alamomusic.com. If you haven't already, please subscribe to our channel, like our videos, sign up for notifications. We have a whole lot of content coming out and we don't want you to miss any of it. So as I mentioned before, we are talking about practice amps today. Specifically, we're going over behind me what you can see there, the Rumble 40, as well as also the Ampeg RB108. So these are going to share a couple of differences, predominantly also in the price that we're looking at the two. So before we start getting into all those, let's go ahead and talk a little bit about practice amps. So why would you even want an amp about this size? I know a lot of the times when we're thinking about spending some money on an amp, we typically want something that we can take on stage. And while that's all great, sometimes it does help you to have an amp that is going to be limited by volume when it comes to practicing inside your home, so that way you don't have to be stuck with just a big amp. For example, I myself, as well as some of my colleagues in the music scene, as I can call them, a lot of us tend to have a practice space. One universal person where we go there and jam to play, or at a location specifically like a shed or a storage unit. So sometimes it is beneficial to not have to lug around an amp, especially if we're talking about a gig-worthy amp. Sometimes we're looking at 30, 40, 50, 60 pounds that this amplifier can be, and if we're talking about going all the way up to 810s, these huge cabinets, it's even bigger. So having to move that once a week, if you're lucky, sometimes even more, twice a week, can definitely be a burden. That's exactly where an amp like this can come in handy, where you have your big boy set up at the storage unit or at the practice facility, then you keep one around the house. Or in general, let's say you live in an apartment, you live somewhere where you really can't play your amp that loudly. Sometimes you can get a little bit more of a beneficial gain to yourself when you're putting the volume up a little bit louder, as opposed to having to play it at the volume of like 1 or 2. On certain amps, especially if we start getting into like the tube style variety, being able to crank it up a little bit more will be able to help you get a little bit more warmth and a little bit more of a neutral sound that's not going to get impacted on either the bass or the mids because it's such a low volume. Now, with the amps that we're talking about today, as I mentioned, there is going to be some substantial differences. Predominantly, where you're going to want to factor in is going to be on the price, because as of right now, where we're at currently filming this, looking at about a roughly $50 price difference, give or take, on the Rumble. It's going to be a little bit more. So why is that? Let's go over these two. So first thing, let's talk about the Ampeg a little bit. So with the Ampeg RB108, what you're going to be getting here is going to be a pretty straightforward amplifier. Now, before we continue, I do want to stress, not really looking at any wrong options here, really not. You're really just looking at two different options within that same type of price spectrum that people would normally range it in. So starting with the Ampeg, again, we got a 30-watt amp coming out of a 8-inch speaker. So that means that we're not going to be getting a super duper loud volume, but it is going to be a loud enough volume that you may be able even to put it into a practice setting when you're jamming with other folks. It's not going to be strictly limited to just by yourself, where it's just a personal volume amp. It's going to be a pretty fairly loud to be able to compete. Maybe if you got an E-kit with a bass, or maybe even a drummer that can play fairly lightly, you might be able to compete in that spectrum. But I don't want to just tell you like you buy this 30-watt, that suddenly you can go out and jam with your friends and it's going to be blasting all loud and everything's going to be super loud. You're going to get lost in that mix. But for the most part though, it can compete on that level if you're jamming with a drummer that's maybe on an E-kit with an amp, or maybe even that can know how to play at that kind of softness to accommodate for it. But mostly if you're jamming with your friends, when you're working with other guitar players, you're not really going to get lost in the mix that easily. That's where that volume benefits. Now, it is also going to include the SGT option, which is going to be the super grid technology. Which basically means it's going to give you a slight overdrive distortion tone to it. Now, the problem, at least at this level, is the SGT is not going to give you any kind of control. So you're not going to have an actual drive button. You're not going to have an overdrive SGT level. It's going to activate that grid technology, and from there start giving that based on where your amp is right now. You're not going to have a direct control over that. So it really is just kind of like that connection, and then it just turns on to the SGT. But in terms of what the controls you get, it's going to be a straightforward control. You got your volume, got your bass, got your mids, got your treble. In addition to that, you also can see that it's going to have two different inputs. One that says 0 dB and one that's negative 15 dB. Now, when we're jumping over to the Rumble, now this is where we're going to start getting, as I mentioned, at the time of this video, about a $50 price difference, but that's also going to come with a whole host of differences. So just keeping it basic, let's talk about the controls. As I mentioned, on that Ampeg, you're looking at standard volume, bass, treble, mids. On the Rumble, you do get that as well, but what you will notice is that the Rumble offers you a much more bigger control on the mids, which means that you're actually also getting a low mid and a high mid adjustment. So that way you can fine tune and get in there a little bit more to the tone that you're trying to chase, as opposed to being limited to what just the mid range is. You do have a little bit more control on the high and the low to give you a little bit more of a contour and color to your tone that you're trying to chase. And in addition to that, you also kind of get a little bit more than just kind of one amp here a little bit, it feels, because of the fact that you have 3 different styles of voicings available. So what we'll have available on there is going to be the bright, the contour, and they're going to have the vintage. When you click on that bright, and you'll be able to hear all these in the demo, when you click on that bright, it's going to suddenly give you all of a high-end boost. When you hit that contour, it's going to give you a mid scoop. When you hit that vintage, you're going to start getting a tube emulation. So what that means is that, let's say, just some quick examples, let's say that you are doing more of a funk, something that's more of a slap and pop. That mid scoop coming from the contour is going to be more better adapted at that kind of tone. Let's say maybe you're trying to do some more of a rock style, just straight rock style. That vintage kicked on, it's going to give you that tube emulation. It's going to be more in line with what that tone is that we're used to getting in that genre. So, you know, at the end of the day, as long as it sounds good, you're great. But it does help knowing that if you wanted something that's going to fall more into that kind of funk spectrum, it can give you that. If you want something that's going to fall more into that rock spectrum, it can kind of give you that. And in addition to that, you'll notice that there is more voicings with the overdrive control. Though the overdrive is an actual overdrive being added on here, which can actually be triggered through an external foot switch. Those features are not going to be found on the Ampeg. But with the overdrive, it is going to give you the option to level that overdrive and to give you more gain on that overdrive. So it's not just going to be in like the SGT technology where it just clicks on the distortion. It is going to give you a more overdrive and give you that control. At the end of the day, all of this, what this means though, is that on the Rumble, you're going to be getting a lot more control in regards to how you want to contour your sound and tone and how you interact with your bass amp. Now, in addition to that, it is going to actually be louder. 40 watts versus 30 watts with a larger speaker, 10-inch versus 8-inch. But here's the kicker. It's actually going to be lighter by about almost 5 pounds. The Rumble runs in at about 18 pounds, give or take, while the Rocket Bass, the RB108, actually goes at about 23. One thing that is to note about this, that I brought up, the biggest factor is going to be that there is a price difference. Yes, the Rumble has this big host difference, but as I mentioned, almost close to a $50 price difference. Now, a lot of the times that can be the breaking point. We're at the time of filming, the RB is going for about 180, give or take, American USD, and the Fender Rumble 40 is going at about 230, give or take. You know, at the time of this filming, Fender USD again. So that $50 difference. Well, yeah, we're not talking about 1,000, we're not talking about 2,000. I'm not going to pretend $50 is nothing. So sometimes not being able to put out that extra 50 may be enough of a selling point to decide, hey, you know what, I will go ahead and sacrifice those features. I don't necessarily need them 100%. I can gladly just pay $200 plus some tax and just go for the smaller amp if I need it for that practice spectrum. So before we talk a little bit more about maybe why you might need this and discuss more about some of the differences between the two in terms of our usability to them, let's actually go and hear them out. That way you can get an idea of what they sound like before we move on to anything further. Stick around. So as you guys could hear, there was some differences out of the tone that we got there, and in terms of just how many different tones that we actually could get. So before we go on a little bit more, as y'all can see, just to go over, we did record those two samples using these microphones behind me. That's going to be, both of them, sure, they're going to be the Beta 52 as well as also 57. We did that so that way we can try to give you the most range as we can, you know, get the 52 to hit those lows, get the 57 to get those highs. We normally, whenever we do bass videos, we'll do DI because you're just trying to hear the bass. So we figured this might be the best way to give you the full spectrum of the the audio of the bass. So hopefully that does come across. I definitely would recommend, if you didn't do so, maybe go back and listen to them again, maybe with some headphones. That might help out. Or if you do have good speakers, I would definitely recommend that. That'll help give you a little bit more of a sound of the differences that you get out of them in better detail. Now, another cool factor about this, which kind of did make it on the point of the microphone, which did make it a little bit easier to mic up, is that on both of these, you actually have the ability to just pull off the grill tabs and expose the speakers. Now that does actually help out in two factors. For us, that helped us out because we could very easily see the speakers and mic them up that easier if you are doing that. Another good factor of that is that it also allows you to get easier access to the speaker, just in case if it does break or wear down, you don't have to replace the whole front hood or have to figure out how to take apart an amplifier. You just have to pop up the grill screen and in theory get to that. Now, of course, if you are not comfortable doing this, always take it to a trusted repair tech, something like Alamo Music, where they can do that for you. But if you are comfortable with doing it yourself, it does help knowing that it is that easy to just remove it. And maybe we're not going that crazy, you know, these are grill screens, so let's just say maybe if you have a cat gets scratched up, you have a dog, or like me, sometimes a cat that's in heat, if they're not spayed or neutered, they very easily can come to this. They may pee on it, scratch it up, destroy it, or even not that, you maybe have kids, maybe draw it up, scratch it up. You can replace this part as well. You don't have to aesthetically keep it looking messed up because this is all in one piece, where to replace this, basically have to replace this whole piece of wood. So that's another really cool feature right there. Wrong one. That's another really cool feature right there. And then just back on as easily as you took them off. If you can see them, just very simple pull tab, that easy. So it's very convenient as well to get into them. So there was a lot of them, as I could tell, and as you can see there, again, as I mentioned earlier, 8-inch versus 10-inch. So we got a 10-inch speaker. We have a line out in the back. Now, both of these do have aux in and headphones. So if you do need a practice amp, or maybe if you're trying to get junior practice amp, or somebody that's just starting out, if you want to jam to your favorite songs, you do have that ability. I don't believe they come with the line outs, but you do have the ability to do that. Or if, let's say, you want to practice and you don't want to be as loud as even this amp is, you want to be a private session, both of them do have headphone, 1/8 inch, not a 1/4 inch, so you don't need any kind of adapter. Any kind of headphones will work to plug in on that end. So they both do have that going for them. But as I mentioned earlier, and as you kind of heard too, considering the differences, the Rumble does offer a whole lot more. We're going to be getting a lighter amp, 18 pounds, which is great. Louder speaker, 40 watts compared to 30, 10 inches compared to 8. We're going to be getting a high-end booster. We're going to be getting a Contour, which is a mid scoop. We're going to be getting the Vintage. We're going to be getting the Overdrive. We're going to be getting the option for line out, a grounded line out. We're going to be getting the option for mid-low. All of that is great. And for just $50 more, that seems like a deal. But I think another thing to factor in is all of those things I mentioned, while great, are they worth it to you for the extra $50? Like, yeah, it seems like a no-brainer, an extra $50, cool, I'll get that amp. But let's paint the scenario. So let's just say, for example, let's say you have a good bass. Let's just say you have a Mark bass. So that's a really good brand. And you have one that's not a combo. Let's say you have one that is going to be detachable head as well as also the cab. Now, for the Mark bass heads, a lot of them are pretty small. Like, we're talking about like a little satchel that probably weighs less than 2 or 3 pounds. That's already going to include DI. So do you need to have the extra line out when you maybe already have an amplifier that has the option to take a part of it, like the head, and use that for line out if you're trying to record? Same goes with that extra high-low, mid-low, mid-lows, high mids. That sounds great, but let's say you have the amp that the bass that I was using. I was using a Player Plus Jazz, by the way, in case anyone's interested. We do have a video on that as well. But we're doing the Player Plus. That amp, and it was straightforward how I had it. Everything's set to the middle, it's in passive, but if I wanted to, I can turn on active. I can pan pot select. I can go to the bridge pickup. I can go to the neck pickup. I have control over treble boost, mid boost, low boost. I can sculpt that bass to do so many different tones in and of itself that do I necessarily need my amp to have to do that? Or if, let's just say, I already have, back to that Mark bass situation, I already have my tone dialed in on my Mark bass. That's the tone I love to use. That's the one I'm gonna record with no matter what. Does it matter that I now have that high, low, mid on the Rumble where I can sculpt it when I don't need this to be sculpted? So for $50 more, it does come with a lot, but the thing to factor in is those $50 extra at the time of this video, sometimes it could be even more. Is that price difference extra for what it comes with in terms of what you need? If, let's say, all you need is a practice amp, all you need is just something where at home, when I'm there, I can play my scales. My son, my daughter wants to become a musician. They want to play bass. I don't want to necessarily buy them something that's going to be super expensive. At the same time, I don't want to just buy them bottom of the barrel. Do I need them right at the start when they don't really even know much about what they're learning to suddenly now, well, don't just get exposed to treble, mid, high. Now you got to deal with high mids, lows. It doesn't seem like much, but when you don't know anything, having to learn 4 things at once, and one of them being a dividing factor of one thing on its own, that can be overwhelming. So all of these features are great, they're awesome, but they may not necessarily be needed, because the things to take into account is this. The Rumble is going to provide you, honestly, in my opinion, it's going to provide you a really, really good balance between something that is going to be in the house and maybe even usable at a show. But if you don't necessarily need that balance, you need something that's probably going to be straight at the house or at the gig or jamming, that's where actually the RB comes in handy. And $50 definitely makes a big difference. I mean, $50. You walk into a store with $230, you can get the Rumble. You walk into the store with the ones with $230 and you buy the RB, maybe that means you also get strings and a strap. Or maybe it means that you buy other stuff like a cord or cable. So those $50 doesn't just mean it's $50 extra. It's more things that could possibly be used to help amplify your comfort in playing your bass. A longer cable, maybe a different strap, different strings that sound better. So all of those things are things to factor in. It's not just the $50 difference, just pay the $50, you get all this extra. That $50 could go towards other things that you might find more comfortable to use versus just the amp. Now again, boiling it down, you really don't have any wrong choice. None really whatsoever. The Rumble series is fantastic by Fender, and the RB series going all the way up the line. And again, we're sticking right now to the practice, but when we're going up, when we're talking about the 250, we're talking about the RB 210s, fantastic amps in and of themselves for combo amps. They're fantastic grades. So you're not going to get any wrong avenue. But I do think it's very important to note that what do I need at home? What do I need from a practice amp? Do I need a practice amp that's just going to give me bare bones, bottom of the barrel, but it sounds fantastic? Or do I need to have that additional boost of creativity when I need it by being able to get a distortion or a contour? Does scooping in allow me thereby now to create different type of music? Now that I can scoop in the funk, can I come up with a funk riff that doesn't feel so comfortable on a different type of tone? So again, either way, none is wrong, but it is important to note that when you're paying that extra, you're getting all those extra features. Yes, they're not always 100% the features that you need for using it, for how you want to be at home with your bass amp. In general though, we do recommend practice amps. I know I've recommended a practice amp. I personally find it more comfortable playing on a practice amp and cranking it up than I do having to keep my higher amps really low. And depending also how your amp is organized, I remember when I was younger, being a kid, I used to have the Spider series from Line 6, and they have the front end buttons. At the time, I accidentally slide down. This is a 500 watt amp. I accidentally hit the volume all the way up, so my volume from super low suddenly gets boosted up all the way up to halfway or more, and now I have this 500 watt thing just blasting really loud. It's fun to say I must have been a teenager, but my parents were not happy just for that little blast. So it does sometimes help having the limitation of the volume when it comes to just playing at home. But either way, do want to stress you can't go wrong either with the Rumble series or the RB series when it comes to something to use inside the home, or in general, maybe if you're looking for an amp that's going to be on the live setting too. Hopefully we'll be able to do a video sooner later than later where we compare the bigger ones so you can get the full scope of what they offer. But for now though, in general, the Fender Rumble or the Ampeg RB108, the ones that we're comparing right now, two great amps. Either one is going to do you fantastic. All you got to do is just ask yourself, where am I in my musical journey? Do I need all the extra, or am I fine with just the bare bones that sounds great? So once again, this is Carlos with Alamo Music Center. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. Make sure to sign up online for notifications, like our video, subscribe to the channel, comment below as well what your favorite practice amp is too. We have a whole lot of content coming out. We want y'all to share it with us. So thank you so very much for watching. You have a great rest of your day.